Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America. I'm Richard Heffner, your host on The Open Mind, and as I noted last time, because I've read him so often and for so long now, regularly in the Columbia Journalism Review and in the American Prospect, as well as on the op-ed pages of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times, and of course because of his recently published collection of provocative essays on journalism and democracy, titled Why Democracies Need an Unlovable Press, I've invited an eminent sociologist to be our Open Mind guest once again today. A Harvard PhD, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a MacArthur Foundation Genius Award winner, Michael Schudson is Distinguished Professor in the Department of Communication at the University of California in San Diego and Professor of Communication at the Graduate School of Journalism, Columbia University. Today I want to begin by asking Professor Schudson what his fix is on that famous, or perhaps infamous, first paragraph of Janet Malcolm's New Yorker magazine piece on the journalist and the murderer from 20 years ago. And she wrote, "Every journalist who is not too stupid or too full of himself to notice what is going on knows that what he does is morally indefensible. He is a kind of confidence man, preying on people's vanity, ignorance, or loneliness, gaining their trust and betraying them without remorse. Like the credulous widow who wakes up one day to find the charming young man and all her savings gone, so the consenting subject of a piece of non-fiction writing learns, when the article or the book appears, his hard lesson. Journalists justify their treachery in various ways according to their temperaments," she concludes. "The more pompous talk about freedom of speech and the public's right to know, the least talented talk about art, the seemliest murmur about earning a living." Now, Michael, I've asked this question and read that quotation to many, many, many people here from the world of journalism. Most of them people who say, there's no one in here but us chickens. We journalists or professors of journalism have no influence whatsoever. What do you think about that comment that Janet Malcolm made, rather bitterly?
It's a comment that even before she wrote it, I thought about in a more personal way, about sociologists, because we're also con men and con women. At those of us who do interviewing or ethnographic work, we're entering into a community, a set of people, just us chickens, just one person talking to another. But those people are going to stay living in that community, and I'm going to go back to my study and write a book and make an academic career.
But they're going to stay anonymous.
They're going to stay anonymous. That's true. That's different from the journalist. But the person-to-person connection there is similar. I'm asking a question to you as a sociologist in the field, or an anthropologist. with a different audience in mind, not just you. It's a peculiar kind of question asking for a public that will someday be there, whether we still have a relationship or not. The journalist is different. I think you make a good point, because the damage that can be done to an individual through this con game is enormous, because I am going to say what your name is, usually. And so I take her famous paragraph, Malcolm's famous paragraph, quite seriously. I also see it in some historical perspective. The interviewing, journalistic interviewing, has a history. And it's actually not that long a history. It's, for all practical purposes, invented by American journalists in the late 19th century. Had journalists talked to other human beings before that? Yes, but they did not report their conversations. That form of journalism just didn't exist. And when it started in the U.S. late 19th century, European observers were horrified. They thought this was presumptuous. They thought it was an invasion of privacy. Of course, they also didn't like reporting of any sort. I mean, reporting seemed a diminution of what, to them, French visitors, English visitors, Danish visitors, seemed the more high literary aspirations that journalism should have. The Americans were plebeian. The American journalists were plebeian. They were in the streets. They were having these conversations and then reporting them. And the Europeans really felt that this was a dumbing down, an Americanization of what had been a highly regarded occupation, as they saw it.
Even then, huh?
Even then. So, and indeed, it took American journalists to teach their European counterparts during World War I that they could try interviewing a British cabinet officer, a Scandinavian monarch, the Pope, and the first journalists to interview any of those categories of people were Americans. Again, late 19th and early 20th century. Well, that, I think, was progress. There was something not only about journalism as such, but about American habits of social democracy that produced interviewing. Is it a product that is paradoxical and dangerous, and in which the interviewee puts himself or herself at risk? Yeah, it is. That's just part of the game that we're in, part of the enterprise, and it's an enterprise that, on balance, I think, is good for a system that invites people in to participate in governing.
It's sort of the kind of answer that you offer in the title of your book, Why Democracies Need an Unlovable Press. Goes with the territory.
I think that's right. Does that mean you can't have some rules, some guidelines, some self-imposed ways of being respectable? No, of course you can, and you should, and it is still true in the mainstream news media that if you fake something and it's discovered, you lose your job quickly. I mean, and this has happened again and again, unfortunately.
Of course, that you're talking now about faking something, and we've seen too much of that recently. But you're right. If it's discovered, you lose your job. But I think she was writing about something somewhat different, that in terms of the relationship between the asked and the asker.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying, how do you patrol that? I mean, in a sense, I don't think you do. The reporter wants to extract information from an interviewee that interviewee depending on the circumstances, may be very unwilling to give, or may give off, as Irving Goffman would say, give off sort of accidentally without intending to, and it will then harm that person.
It's interesting that the interviewee, and I know this from so many times, having told my students about this piece or having given them the Janet Malcolm piece to read and taken it as a warning to watch out when you talk to the press, what the press's interest is, that I'll do it myself again and again and again. That wonderful feeling, well, I'm going to say it how it is. I'm going to tell the truth. And of course, it'll be reported just as I say it. And that's not the truth. So maybe it's a little training of the rest of us rather than just the press.
Maybe. Yeah. And you know, too many people have that experience of saying, well, those are the words I said, but that's not what I meant, and I know that reporter knows that, but the reporter reframed it in some different context than I had expected. It looks different in print than the way I said it to that person across the table.
Of course, we were talking last time about political candidates and about presidents, and that's how they must feel with a vengeance. I'm
sure they do, yes. I remember from Teddy White's book on the making of the president in 1960, he talked about the multiple campaigns and how easy it was for a candidate, even far behind in the polls, to feel that things were going well because the candidate was speaking to crowds who were very enthusiastic. Huge numbers of people, more than he'd ever spoken to in his life. There are different things going on simultaneously, multiple conversations at once, and that's just the peculiar system we have when we have so many different competing media covering the same story at the same time for different audiences in different ways. Douglas complained of Lincoln that he said one thing in northern Illinois, which was strongly anti-slavery, and another thing when he was speaking in southern Illinois, which was strongly pro-slavery. You can still do that, but it's harder.
Not so easy.
It's not so easy.
Which leads me, Michael, to ask you about the impact. As you teach communications, as you write about the media, all I can think of is ask, what about the new modalities of communications? How are they impacting upon journalism, the teaching of journalism, your feelings about journalism? Scared?
Well, the scary part, and there is a scary part to it, to me, although I'm mostly an optimist about it. The scary part is the damage being done to the economic basis of the daily newspaper, because to this day, the rest of the media, television, radio, and the blogosphere, the web media in general, are all parasitic on the daily newspaper and the wire services. They are the ones that invest enormous resources in hiring reporters, people who go out telephone or shoe leather and investigate the world. Most everyone else is commenting on what they read in the newspaper, and there is some investigative reporting online now. Talking Points memo is one that won a key investigative journalism award for its work. Others are doing that, but they're small operations. I would guess that there the 800 or 900, no, it's more. It's over 1,000 editorial employees at the New York Times outweighs by itself all of the actual trained investigators that are online only in the country, maybe in the world. I don't know.
Trained.
I said trained. Yes, because there are hundreds, thousands of so-called citizen journalists. Huffington Post, put together a kind of network of several hundred by itself, just this one online organization. And it had some impact. I mean, in particular, one citizen journalist working for the Huffington Post picked up the line in Barack Obama's campaign in Pennsylvania about bitter working class people. And then it was a 2 or 3 or 4 day, maybe more, media event for a while as the Republicans started. At that point, it wasn't Republicans; it was Hillary Clinton saying, "Yeah, that's right. That he's the wrong man for you."
Well, but I'm sure you make this point not out of a sense that this is unfair. These are parasites feeding upon the printed press, but out of a concern the printed press will disappear.
Right, and you're right.
And then we'll have nothing.
I didn't quite finish my point there. Yes, the economic future of the newspaper, magazines are doing better, but the newspaper, where again they're the ones making the real investment in reporting, it is troubled. It just is that that our leading news organizations, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, have all cut back their staffs. Lesser lights have already done so and are continuing to do so. That's part of the context too for teaching in a journalism school. Journalism schools, I have the luxury of being the armchair theorist. I'm not teaching students to go out there and report, but those who do that teaching are teaching simultaneously. Here's how you write a story, and here's how you do the story on television, and here's how you do the story online, all at once. And each, at the J School at Columbia, each section of that intro reporting and writing course has its own website, and the stories go up on the website.
What's your prediction about what is going to happen to the printed press?
It's going to shrink. It is already shrinking. Is it going to disappear? I don't think so.
What's going to keep it from disappearing?
It will evolve in several ways, but I have no formula for this. One, all of the print media essentially have online operations. They're not bringing in the dollars yet, and ours is a commercially based system that's been its greatest strength, and also at this point possibly its greatest weakness. Can independent nonprofits work? Can foundations or help subsidize the press? Will the online operations find a way to make money? Will some of the print operations become more specialized or sort of boutique operations? I mean, in a way, the Wall Street Journal can succeed for a long time because it has a very specialized audience. It reaches many more people too, but it has a core specialized audience in the business community that needs that newspaper. The New York Times may evolve into a kind of national presence. It's been moving in that direction for 25 years, with a national set of subscribers who will pay perhaps more than they're paying now, maybe a lot, to keep that newspaper, print or online, coming to them. Some regional powerhouses may become more magazine-like. I don't know. I don't have that answer, and I have yet to talk to anyone who has a very good sense of what the economic future of this core of our news system is going to be.
Okay, so much for the economic underpinning. We don't know. What about other aspects of the impact of the new media? Journalism, you pointed out to me before, teaching journalism, journalism as a profession is comparatively new. I guess we could talk a little over a century old. Profession has standards. Profession recognizes its responsibilities. What's happening to that set of recognitions with the new media, with the blogosphere?
Right. In some respects, it's under assault. And the part where it's under assault, it's the speed up on the news assembly line. It's the 24-hour news system. It's having to get your story up on your blog or on your online edition before the print edition comes out because someone else is otherwise going to get it up there first.
In the New York Times, 40 seconds ago, entered 40 seconds ago.
That's right. That's right. And I'm a scholar. I think and work slowly. And that you have to update your own opinion every 40 seconds seems just crazy to me. And that every 24 hours is bad enough. My column you read in Columbia Journalism Review comes out 6 times a year, and I'm worrying that I'm constantly under deadline. So a journalist would find that silly, but there's great benefit to slowing things down sometimes. I was reading about our Constitutional Convention back in 1787, where on a request by any state, they could delay voting on a proposal until the next day, even if debate had been completed. Why? Well, maybe they wanted to do a little politicking over dinner.
I'm sure that's true.
I'm sure that's true. But it also gives people a chance to reflect, to let it settle. So that's a problem too, that the blogosphere and online media present. The great virtue is that, and I think this is good, it will be good in the long run for the press, that the media most of us attend to, the mainstream media, which are, this is still overwhelmingly 95% of what is available to most people that they actually look at. They're being looked at by this a world of media critics, as I say, disparagingly, but I think there's truth in it. That the media critics who are, like me too, parasitic on the work that the mainstream media do. I think this is going to have many benefits. I think that the mainstream media are watching themselves because somebody's watching them. Somebody with a voice, not just Joe Citizen writing a letter to the editor 3 days later about something the newspaper got wrong, but someone with a megaphone. Where people find the time to read all of this, I don't know, but enough do, so that information, criticism, revision, improvement circulates with kind of remarkable speed.
We have 3 minutes left. I want to ask you a question that I, again, ask so many of the people who come from the media, from journalism. You're a sociologist. You have a longer point of view. I talk in terms of longer point of view. I talk about the notion that the first draft of history is what appears in the daily press. And I take that and frequently ask my guests, don't you then, as writing the first draft of history, have something of the responsibilities of the historian? And I always get no, no, no. And I wonder what you think about that. I get too fast a no from most of the people.
I wouldn't say no. I mean, if the responsibilities of the historian are to get the story straight and to some degree put it in perspective, I'd separate those two. Getting the story straight is absolutely the responsibility of the journalist, getting it straight rather than getting it first. And I have to say, being relatively new to a journalism school, one of the first things as a new faculty member was that a student had apparently taken some information from a printed source and presented it as the student's own. Something being reported. This led to the student was ultimately removed from the program. But the discussion among the faculty I found fascinating as at the time, an outsider to this. There was such a sense of moral urgency about it. That's what I found so striking. People had different views about the given situation, but the moral urgency was without question. You can't do that. You have to give this story straight, and it has to be your own work. You have to have been there. You had to interview someone. You had to be there. The putting in perspective that's hard for the historian too, and the journalist can't do very much of it. And maybe that's where the journalists go wrong, out of deadline pressure and so forth.
You're more generous than I am, but you deal with the journalists all the time. Thank you so much for joining me again today, Michael Schudson.
Pleasure.
And thanks too to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time. For transcripts of today's program, please send $4 in check or money order to The Open Mind, P.O. Box 7977, FDR Station, New York, New York 10150. Meanwhile, as an old friend used to say, good night and good luck. Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Bluestein Family Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Malkin Fund, the May and Samuel Rudin Family Foundation, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.